My name is Aaron Fukuda. I'm the co-chairman of the Citizens for California High-Speed Rail Accountability. As many of you will begin to start engaging in the California High-Speed Rail process, many of you will come to the realization that you're going to need to learn about this project, and when your property is in jeopardy, there's two critical laws you're probably going to need to know about as you move through the process. That is Proposition 1A and AB 32, and I'll cover those for you so you understand them. Proposition 1A was the integral legislation that established the California High-Speed Rail Authority and their funding, and it was passed in 2008. What voters were promised in that legislation was an 880-mile high-speed rail system connecting San Francisco to LA with a trip time of 2 hours and 40 minutes and connections to Sacramento and San Diego, and it all to be constructed by the year 2020 for approximately $33 billion. There'd be a cost share. The state would pick up about a third of that, $10 billion. The federal government would pick up about a third of it at about $11 billion, and then the private funding would pick up the remainder of that. So it was a logical approach to building a high-speed rail system. So what are we getting today? Well, we're getting a high-speed rail system, proposed system, from only San Francisco to LA by potentially the year 2027. We feel that they probably logically cannot get it completed until maybe 2030 to 2035. They're anticipating the trip time to be over 3 hours between San Francisco to LA. It may not be a one-seat ticket. You may have to transfer trains. And really at today's situation, they only have enough money to build a dirt berm with tracks from somewhere in Merced to approximately just south of Corcoran, north of Shafter. They really can't determine where they're going to stop with the funding because every day they find new impacts that cost them more money and they keep shortening the track. So Proposition 1A was really crafted to control the project through its funding, and so that you would limit the number of cost overruns and delays typically seen on large infrastructure projects. And that really was the innovative part of Proposition 1A, not the train itself. There are high-speed rail trains all over the world, but what the legislators proposed to the voters in Proposition 1A was that we would not start this system without identifying all of the funding and having all the pieces in place so that we can guarantee to the voters that we could achieve a high-speed rail system as promised in Proposition 1A. And as could have been foreseen, the authority was established and then quickly moved to avert any of those requirements because they were simply not achievable with what the authority wanted to do. So in today's world, as I said, we are only getting a high-speed rail system from San Francisco to LA if they're able to come up with all of the funding in a trip time greater than 3 hours. And so that's what your property will be sacrificed for, something that the voters did not want. Proposition 1A funding was tied to a funding plan so that the authority could not spend money unless they met key requirements. I am a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the High-Speed Rail Authority, which is essentially the state of California, along with the other plaintiffs in the lawsuit, John Toss and Kings County. We're challenging that the authority did not meet the funding plan requirements, therefore cannot begin spending money or issue the bonds. Some of the key items that we're challenging are the authority in the funding plan was supposed to identify all the sources of funds for the high-speed rail project. Right now, they've only identified about $6 billion for the initial operating segment, which is from Merced to San Fernando. That segment alone requires $28 billion. So they're woefully short of all of that funding. There is no private investment that's stepped forward. The federal government has made a pledge not to contribute any more funding to the project. So the authority is really moving forward under a false pretense that they are going to achieve high-speed rail service with the $6 billion that they've identified, of which they can only access $3 billion at this moment. The second point we challenged was that the authority didn't have all of their environmental clearances. They have only secured environmental clearances from Merced to Fresno, and they have approved Fresno to Bakersfield. However, they are currently being litigated against on that CEQA documentation. And they had to guarantee to the voters that they would have environmental clearances from San Francisco to Los Angeles, which they do not. We're challenging their trip times. As I stated before, they felt that they could make it in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Documents are showing now that the trip time could be greater than 3 hours. We are challenging the ridership forecasts. Interestingly enough, in their ridership modeling, if you look at some of their charts, they used a modeling mechanism that showed that the further away you are, the more likely you are to use high-speed rail trains. That would indicate that if you were in the Mojave Desert, there was greater ridership coming from that area. So there's certain flaws in that ridership. They also did ridership surveys, and those surveys were conducted on Bay Area transit trains. So those individuals that were riding the train are more biased to ride public transportation and a train mode of public transportation. And then one of the last things we're challenging is the authority is currently proposing to transfer the high-speed rail trains onto conventional tracks when they reach the Bay Area and the LA Basin. This was done as a political measure to gain support from the Bay Area legislators and the LA Basin legislators. But if you can imagine putting high-speed rail trains on a conventional train and running them together, accidents are waiting to happen, and or you must slow the train down to conventional train speeds, which sacrifices your time. The other critical law that's playing at hand, and it came into the picture more recently, is AB 32, which is the cap and trade legislation. This piece of legislation was passed by the voters to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 standards to address climate change. And what it does is it issues credits to those who pollute, and they can use that to offset their pollution. And they create a bank of funds that then can be used on projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. When the project faced a critical juncture where they couldn't find any more funding, the governor stepped in and appropriated approximately $250 million out of the cap and trade funds, which was about 25% of its funds, to the California High-Speed Rail project, which, if you look at the $250 million, it doesn't add to the construction of the project. Really, it's almost a gesture that keeps the lights on at the high-speed rail. They have such a mass of consultants and staff that it requires about $250 million just to keep them alive. As I stated before, AB 32 requires the funds that are there to be used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 standards by the year 2020. However, the high-speed rail project, as I stated earlier, will not even have service until maybe 2027 at the earliest, but more realistically 2030 to 2035. So the use of these funds is highly illegal. A UC Berkeley study actually found that the high-speed rail system is probably going to be a net polluter when you look at a life cycle analysis, which looks at all the individual components of the high-speed rail system, from the creation of the train sets, the operation of the train, the construction. It actually will become a net polluter. Our Legislative Analyst Office, which is in Sacramento and performs analysis on legislation and the budget and other actions the governor does, actually found that in the initial stages of the high-speed rail project, the system will actually add 30,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases to the environment. It will not save, but it will add. And they found that in reality, they won't be able to achieve anything by the year 2020, but add to the pollution. And lastly, if the project doesn't achieve full ridership, they never see all of that, then at the end of the day, the system will be a guaranteed net polluter. So these two laws are important for you to understand as you talk to the High-Speed Rail Authority and they're asking to take your property. These two seminal laws established are being used inappropriately to take your property. We encourage you to dig deeper into these issues, know the High-Speed Rail Project, and get informed. Thank you.